every last inch.
That's what the HOA president screamed, while 3 landscapers cut apart the Firebreak fence I built the summer after my wife Caroline died. By the time I pulled in the driveway, 400 feet of galvanized mesh and cedar posts were piled on my curb like construction trash. Charlotte Ashford stood in the middle, sunglasses perched like a crown she'd given herself. That's the thing about people like her. Give them 9 years of fake authority, and they start mistaking vandalism for leadership. What Charlotte Ashford didn't know was that my fence was permitted under Colorado Fire Code, legally required for every lot bordering Pinewood Canyon. She didn't know her own mansion sat on the highest fire risk lot in the subdivision, and she definitely didn't know this. 6 weeks later, the canyon lit up. The only thing standing between her house and the flame front was a man she'd just humiliated in her own driveway, me. Tell me below, would you have stopped her or let her keep tearing down her own protection? This is how it happened. I bought the land above Pinewood Canyon in 1998 for one reason. My wife Caroline fell in love with it. We were driving up from Fort Collins one Saturday when she made me pull over at the overlook. The Chinook wind was coming down off the Rockies that afternoon. Dry, pine-heavy, the kind of air that smells like a wood stove 40 miles away. Caroline stood at the edge of the canyon with her hand over her mouth. She said, "Hunter, this is it. This is where I want to grow old." 3 weeks later, we signed. We built the house ourselves over 2 summers, weekends, most of it by my own hands. I spent 22 years with the U.S. Forest Service as a fire behavior analyst. I knew every ridge, every fuel load, every wind pattern off that canyon. Caroline knew the names of the wildflowers and the sound every bird made at different times of year. It was our place. Caroline died in the spring of 2022. Cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Quick, the doctors said, as if that was supposed to be a kindness. The summer after, I built the Firebreak fence. 400 feet of 12-gauge galvanized steel mesh set between cedar posts, anchored with 3-foot concrete footings. Ran the full western edge of our lot, where it bordered the canyon rim. Every inch permitted by Clayton Reeves, our county fire marshal. Every inch built to the Colorado State Forest Service specifications I'd helped write back in 2014. It wasn't about protecting a house. It was about keeping a promise I'd made to Caroline, that no fire coming out of that canyon would ever reach our land. My daughter Emma was 12 when her mother died. She's 15 now. She swims on the high school team. She's quieter than she used to be. Every night when the wind picks up, she still comes out on the porch and looks west. I don't ask her what she's looking for. I think she already knows. Pinewood Ridge Estates has 87 homes stacked along the eastern rim of Pinewood Canyon, like spectators at a stadium. The developer, back in the 80s, didn't care about fire risk. He cared about views. Every single lot sits in what the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control labels a red zone. The subdivision has one way in and one way out. County Road 47, 2 lanes of asphalt, 4 miles to the state highway. The kind of community that looks like a postcard and burns like a matchstick. Charlotte Ashford moved in during 2013 and started campaigning for HOA president before her moving boxes were empty. She's been president 9 years. Tall, heavy-set, blonde blowout that never moves, white linen blazers over yoga pants, and a pearl Lexus GX with a vanity plate that reads HOAQN. I am not making that up. Her husband Preston sits on the Larimer County Planning Commission and walks around Pinewood Ridge like he owns the county. To be fair, he's been trying. The first time Charlotte saw my Firebreak fence, she drove past it 3 times in slow motion. Then she pulled into my driveway and stepped out without knocking. She informed me the structure was a hideous scar on the western view and an aesthetic disturbance to the entire community. I handed her a copy of the permit. She glanced at it for about half a second and said, "Permits don't override taste, Mr. Brooks." I should have known right then. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. $750, listed violation, non-conforming metalwork, cited under something called the aesthetic harmony provision, which I had never seen in the bylaws. I filed a formal, written objection. 6 months went by with no response. I assumed the board had quietly dropped it. Wrong. She wasn't dropping it. She was waiting for me to leave town. Tuesday, August 22nd. I had a consulting job 2 hours south, at a new subdivision outside Castle Rock. They were trying to get their wildland-urban interface compliance in order before insurance inspections in October. I left the house at 6:30 in the morning. Emma was still asleep. I kissed her on the forehead on my way out. At 11:14, my phone buzzed. Tom, Hunter, where you at? Castle Rock. Why? You better get back here. There are 3 guys on your property with crowbars and a woman pointing at things. She's telling them to rip the whole fence out. I pulled Clayton, Hunter Brooks. Charlotte Ashford's crew is tearing down my Firebreak fence right now. Clayton's voice came back flat and tight. Hunter, that fence is not just permitted, it's required. Lots 34 through 39 under the 2019 Wildfire Mitigation Addendum. That structure is legally mandated infrastructure. I know. Can I get that in writing before the day is over? You'll have it in 2 hours. I hung up and drove. I did not speed. I used the 50-minute drive to think. By the time I pulled up Canyon Vista Road, I'd already done 3 things. I called my attorney friend Paul Whitaker. I told Tom Hollister to film everything quietly from his porch. And I stopped at the gas station halfway to put a fresh memory card in my phone. When I turned onto my driveway, I saw exactly what Tom had described. 3 landscapers were using angle grinders and crowbars to cut apart my Firebreak fence. Joel Kensington was the crew foreman. 2-man team beside him, work boots, dusty orange safety vests. 400 feet of 12-gauge steel mesh was lying in twisted piles on my gravel. Cedar posts, splintered, stacked like kindling. The smell of hot metal dust and cut cedar sap hung in the air like someone had set up a junkyard in my yard. Charlotte stood in the center of all of it, sunglasses up on her head, one hand on her hip, the other holding a clipboard. She was smiling. I stepped out of my truck slow, no slamming doors. I didn't say her name. I walked up to Joel, who was kneeling beside a severed run of cable, and held up my phone so he could see the screen. Joel, you see this? Yeah, that's my county permit for this fence. Did she show you my signature authorizing demolition? Joel's face changed. He sat back on his heels and looked down at the clipboard he'd been carrying. Then he looked at Charlotte, then back at me. He said, "She said you'd signed off. She said you were out of town letting the HOA handle it." Joel, did you see my signature? No. Did you get a copy? She said it was on file. Behind me, Charlotte's voice went up an octave. Joel, keep cutting. I signed the authorization in my capacity as HOA president. That is legally binding. Joel stood up, brushed cedar dust off his jeans, said, very quietly, "Ma'am, I'm not cutting another inch." Charlotte's face went red. She marched across my lawn, her white linen blazer flapping like a flag at a parade. She stood 2 feet from Joel and said, "You are under contract with me. If you walk off this job right now, I will make sure no HOA in this county hires you again." Joel didn't flinch. "Ma'am, I'd rather lose every HOA in Colorado than get sued for destroying state-permitted wildfire infrastructure. Not on the word of a woman who couldn't produce the owner's signature." He gathered his guys and they loaded their tools into their truck. Charlotte followed them across the lawn, screaming. I stayed where I was. I kept recording. Then Charlotte did something she'll regret for the rest of her life. She spun around, stomped back onto my property, and stepped directly onto the severed main cable of the Firebreak. Steel toe wedge boot on galvanized mesh, grinding it into the dirt. On video, tampering with state-permitted fire mitigation infrastructure, a second time, with a witness, and a county fire marshal's written finding on its way. Tom Hollister called from his porch. "Hunter, you gonna say something?" I smiled for the first time that day. "Tom, I already did. I just didn't use words." 3 days after the fence came down, the first letter arrived. Certified. $750 for non-conforming metalwork. The next day, another one, $1,200. Failure to remediate. The day after that, 3 more. By the end of the week, I had 7 certified letters in my mailbox, all signed Charlotte Ashford, HOA President, totaling $8,600 in fines. For a fence she tore down. I actually laughed, out loud, in my kitchen, for about a full minute. Emma came down the stairs and said, "Dad, are you okay?" I said, "Honey, I'm fine. She's just mailing the evidence." The fines weren't the end of it. 2 weeks later, Clayton Reeves called me at my office. His voice was careful. "Hunter, I need to tell you something off the record. Then I need to tell you the same thing on the record. Preston Ashford called me this morning. He asked me, in his capacity as a county planning commissioner, to revisit your defensible space permit. Revisit how? Revoke it. His exact words were, and I'm quoting, "That permit is causing unnecessary friction in a key subdivision, and we'd appreciate it being withdrawn quietly." I closed my eyes. Tell me you recorded it. Colorado is a one-party consent state, Hunter. I recorded every word. And I already filed a memo to the state fire marshal about attempted political interference with a permitted wildfire mitigation structure. Preston just added another charge to the list. Clayton, thank you. Don't thank me. That wasn't a favor. That was my job. I hung up and sat at my desk for a long time, watching the Chinook rattle the pine trees outside my window. Meanwhile, Charlotte was busy at the Pinewood Ridge Friday evening social mixer, the monthly wine and charcuterie affair she treated like her own personal fundraiser. I wasn't there. I don't do HOA mixers. Tom Hollister was. Tom pretends he goes for the shrimp cocktail, but what he actually does is stand by the wall and listen. He called me Saturday morning. "Hunter, I need you to hear what this woman was saying last night." Hit me. She was telling Diane Stafford and two of the newer Snowbird ladies that you had a fixation on fire. Word she used. Fixation. She said your Firebreak fence was paramilitary-style aesthetics. She told them you were driving down home values because your property looked like a Cold War border installation. I am quoting verbatim, Hunter. I memorized it because I knew you'd want it. I laughed again. Second time that week. Tom, you're the best witness a man ever had. I'm a Marine. Observation is the job. What did Diane say? Diane didn't say a word. Just stared at her wine glass like it had insulted her mother. I think Diane's about ready to flip, Hunter. She knows something. I didn't chase Diane. Not yet. What I did instead was go home, sit at my desk, and start filing. 7 formal written objections to 7 fines. 2 records requests. 1 for the full HOA general ledger, 1 for minutes of every board meeting for the past 4 years. 1 certified letter to Charlotte's home address, requesting written justification for the aesthetic harmony provision, and 1 certified letter to the Larimer County Clerk, requesting a copy of the original 1991 HOA charter, not the version Charlotte had been publishing in the bulletin, the one on file with the county. I mailed them all on a Tuesday. On Friday, Paul Whitaker showed up at my door. Paul is 71 years old, retired trust and estates attorney, 42 years at the same Boulder firm. He was HOA secretary at Pinewood Ridge from 1991 to 1994. The founding years, back when the place was half-built and mule deer still grazed in the cul-de-sacs. He keeps his old files the way most men keep their tools, labeled, boxed, accessible. That Friday, he showed up with a 6-pack of Fat Tire and a manila folder that smelled like 30-year-old printer toner. His basement smelled like cedar paneling, Pilot Light hum, and WD-40 on a toolbox. He cleared a space on the workbench and slid the folder toward me. Hunter, I want you to read page 41, Article 14.3. Take your time. I opened the charter. I started reading. My eyes stopped on a single paragraph. I read it again. I read it a third time. I looked up at Paul. Paul, is this what I think it is? Paul sipped his beer, shrugged one shoulder. Hunter, she didn't just destroy a fence she had no right to touch. She destroyed a fence she was legally required to pay the HOA to build. Paul and I sat in his basement until midnight. I read Article 14.3 out loud. I read the rest of the charter. I read every amendment, every annotated insert, every signature page. By the time I walked home through the cold October air, I knew 3 things with absolute certainty. Charlotte had no legal basis for the fines. Charlotte had destroyed a structure the charter required. And Charlotte had been operating a side game at Pinewood Ridge that I did not yet fully understand. I was going to understand it soon. My phone buzzed on my kitchen counter at 7:17 the next morning. Tom Hollister, a text with a video attachment. Hunter, you need to see what's happening on the common area ridge right now. I opened the video. My stomach dropped. Another crew, 4 men this time, different company, green vests, was running chainsaws along the common area ridge that bordered the canyon rim. They were cutting down the juniper bushes, 40 of them. Native Rocky Mountain juniper, 40 years old, planted by the original developer as a natural firebreak, because he'd had a single good idea in his otherwise view-worshipping life. Behind the crew, a second team was rolling out pallets of Kentucky bluegrass sod. Juniper is fire-resistant. Its needles hold moisture, and its branches resist ignition. A mature juniper hedge can slow a flame front by 15 to 30%, depending on wind and humidity. Kentucky bluegrass is the opposite. In an August drought, it's jet fuel. Charlotte wasn't beautifying the ridge. She was paving the runway. I called Clayton Reeves again. Clayton, she's cutting down the common area junipers, replacing them with sod. Long silence. Then, Jesus Christ. I want to report this under 24-33.5-1203, the Fire Mitigation Tampering Statute. That's the one. Hunter, stop calling me from your truck. Come into my office at 3. Bring your attorney. We're going to open a formal file. I pulled up my USGS fire behavior model on the laptop in my home office that afternoon. Built it back in 2018 when I was still consulting part-time for the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. The map showed the Pinewood Ridge subdivision in 3 colors: green for low fuel load, yellow for moderate, red for extreme risk. With the juniper hedge in place, the canyon rim was green. I removed the juniper layer from the model, replaced it with irrigated turf, and hit re-render. The canyon rim flipped from green to deep red in a single sweep. Predicted fire spread rate jumped from 4 feet per minute to 18 feet per minute in a moderate 20-mile-per-hour wind event. My Firebreak fence had been the only thing standing between that new spread rate and the houses on the eastern rim. I stared at the map and started to see a pattern bigger than I'd assumed. I pulled up the Larimer County Property Records database. I checked the 3 properties on our block that had sold in the last 18 months. The Hendrickson Place, the Lombard Place, the Ridgeway Place. All 3 long-time original owners. All 3 sold for 12 to 15% below comparable sales. All 3 sold after receiving repeated HOA fines, citing the same aesthetic harmony provision I'd been hit with. And all 3 sold to the same buyer, a Colorado LLC named Canyon Rim Holdings. I opened the Colorado Secretary of State Business database on another tab. I typed in Canyon Rim Holdings LLC. I hit enter. Registered agent, Preston W. Ashford. Principal office, 14 Pinewood Vista Drive. That's Charlotte's house. I sat back in my chair. Here's what I understood, sitting there in my home office. The Chinook was coming through the screen window, a cold cup of coffee next to my laptop. Charlotte wasn't just a petty neighborhood tyrant with a power complex and a clipboard. Charlotte and Preston had been running a slow-motion land acquisition scheme. Find an original owner. Hit them with made-up fines under the aesthetic harmony provision. Watch the fines pile up until the owner got exhausted or terrified. Offer to buy the property through a shell LLC at a discount. Flip it 6 months later for a profit. Fund the whole thing, I suspected, with HOA reserve money. I called Paul Whitaker, told him what I'd found, asked him to come back over. He showed up 20 minutes later with his briefcase and a second manila folder. Hunter, I pulled the HOA general ledger this morning. You're going to want to see the line item for Canyon Rim Beautification Consulting Fees. $340,000, paid to a consulting firm out of Boulder. Let me guess. Canyon Rim Consulting LLC. Different LLC. Same registered agent. I put my pen down on the desk. Paul looked at me. Hunter, that's not just bad behavior. That's a crime. Multiple crimes. Federal and state. I nodded slowly. Paul, how far down do you want to follow this? Paul smiled for the first time that evening. Hunter, I've been waiting 9 years for someone to hand me this folder. How far do you think? Paul and I spent the next 48 hours the way some men spend a fishing trip. Coffee, legal pads, document stacks, no sleep. Larimer County property records, HOA board minutes, financial statements, Colorado Secretary of State filings, USGS topo maps. We built a timeline on Paul's dining room wall with blue painter's tape and index cards. By Sunday evening, 3 things were undeniable. Reveal 1. Article 14.3 of the 1991 Charter, on file with the Larimer County Clerk, says it plain. Every residence on lots 30 through 45 bordering the canyon rim shall maintain a galvanized wildfire break barrier to state specifications. Not may, not are encouraged to, shall, capitalized in the original. My Firebreak fence wasn't a violation. It was legally required infrastructure. The only reason every lot on the canyon rim didn't already have one was that the charter had fallen into quiet neglect during Charlotte's reign. Reveal 2. In the summer of 2018, Charlotte amended the HOA bulletin, not the charter, not the bylaws, the monthly newsletter she mailed to residents. That's where she inserted her aesthetic harmony provision, a 2-paragraph clause she drafted herself. She cited it on every fine she'd issued for the past 6 years. Paul walked me through the relevant case law. A bulletin is not a governing document. A bulletin cannot override a charter. Only a 2/3 supermajority vote of all owners can amend the charter. No such vote had ever been held, which meant every fine Charlotte had levied under that provision, an estimated 93 fines totaling over $115,000, was legally invalid, arguably fraud. Reveal 3. This was the one that put a chill through me. I pulled up the USGS topographic overlay of Pinewood Ridge Estates. I layered in the fire behavior model. I zoomed in on the canyon rim, Charlotte's own property, Lot 37, 14 Pinewood Vista Drive, the largest mansion in the subdivision, sat directly in the primary Chinook wind corridor. In a canyon origin fire, her lot received the maximum predicted downslope ember cast, the highest radiant heat flux, the longest flame front exposure of any property in the subdivision. Lot 37 was the single highest fire risk lot in all of Pinewood Ridge, and the primary windbreak protecting Lot 37 from downslope fire spread was the 400 feet of Firebreak fencing Charlotte had just ordered torn down. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I said it out loud, to the empty room, so I could hear what it sounded like. She tore down the fence that was keeping her own house from burning. Paul walked in from the kitchen carrying a mug of coffee. He set it in front of me without comment. Then he pulled up a chair, sat down, and looked at the screen. Hunter. Yeah. You've got her on 3 different hooks, civil, criminal, and karmic. Which one do you want to pull first? I thought about it for a minute. The Chinook wind was rattling the windows. Somewhere down the canyon, a hawk was calling. Emma was at swim practice. Caroline's photograph was on the mantel across the room, the one where she's standing at the overlook the day we first saw the land. I picked up my pen. All 3, Paul, quietly, at the same time. And I want the fire marshal, the state division, the FBI, and a reporter in the same room when it all comes out. Paul smiled. That's going to take about 5 weeks to coordinate. I've been waiting 3 years since my wife died. I can wait 5 more weeks. The next 5 weeks were the quietest weeks of my life. While Charlotte kept busy with her bluegrass sod and weekly fine letters, I was building a case. She mailed Paul 3 more, just to keep the rhythm going. I was building a case the way you build a fire line in rough terrain. Slowly, methodically, from 4 directions at once. First direction, the state. I drove down to Denver on a Wednesday morning, sat across a conference room table from Chief Deputy Marion Lockwood at the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. She's a compact woman in her mid-50s, white hair pulled back tight, a former smoke jumper with 30 years on the line. She does not smile easy. I laid out the file, my permit, Clayton Reeves' finding, the video of Joel Kensington's crew cutting the fence, the video of Charlotte grinding the mesh into my driveway, the HOA ledger showing $340,000 in reserve fund transfers, the charter clause, the bulletin amendment, the fire behavior model showing Lot 37. Marion spent 40 minutes with the file. Then she closed it. Mr. Brooks, I've been doing this job since 1994. I've seen HO as cut corners. I've seen HO as ignore state law. I have never seen an HO, a president, actively remove a state-mandated wildfire mitigation barrier. We're opening a formal state audit Monday. I'll have a finding letter drafted by the end of next week. Ma'am, there's a complication. There's an HOA meeting in 5 weeks where she's going to try to amend the charter to strip Article 14.3. Marion looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. Mr. Brooks, I'll be there in uniform, and I'll bring a copy of my finding with me. Second direction, the county. Clayton Reeves issued his written finding on a Friday. 3 pages, single-spaced, on Larimer County Fire Marshal letterhead. Conclusion. The August 22nd removal of a state-permitted wildfire mitigation structure was a prima facie violation of Colorado Revised Statutes Section 24-33.5-1203. Maximum civil penalty, $75,000. Criminal referral, pending. I hired a certified land surveyor from Fort Collins. He GPS pinned the original fence footprint. No future dispute about the exact location of what Charlotte had destroyed. Third direction. The ledger. Paul filed a formal records request under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 38-33.3-317. That's the Common Interest Ownership Act section. Every unit owner has the right to inspect HOA financial records on 48 hours' notice. Charlotte stonewalled. Paul filed a motion to compel. A Larimer County judge signed the order in 18 minutes. Charlotte produced the records 1 hour before the deadline. Heavily redacted. Worthless. Then Diane Stafford called me. She called at 10:47 on a Tuesday night. Her voice was small. She said, "Hunter, I'm the HOA treasurer. I've been silent for too long. I have a second set of financial records, the internal ones, before Charlotte redacts them. Can you come over?" I drove to Diane's house at 11:15 in the rain. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon tea and old cedar cabinets. She slid a USB drive across the breakfast bar. "Hunter, everything is on there. I've been keeping copies since 2019. I couldn't prove anything by myself. Please don't tell her it came from me. Not yet." Fourth direction. The press. Ellie Davenport of Channel 9 News in Denver covers the wildfire beat. She's 34, sharp, has a reporter's instinct for when a small story is actually a big story in a small suit. I sent her a one-page summary. 15 minutes later, she called me back. "Mr. Brooks, how fast can we meet?" She drove up the next afternoon with a cameraman named Colin. We did 2 hours of recorded interviews, with me, with Paul, with Tom Hollister, with Diane, at Paul's dining room table. Ellie told me she'd sit on the piece until the HOA meeting, then break it the same day the state audit findings dropped. Perfect time. In the middle of all this, I did one more thing. I held a free defensible space workshop at the community clubhouse on a Saturday morning. Charlotte tried to cancel the room reservation. Paul quoted HOA bylaw 8.1 at her over the phone. Community safety programs have first priority on common spaces, and she backed off within 2 minutes. 43 neighbors showed up. I taught them about the 5-foot non-combustible zone, the 30-foot reduced fuel zone, and the 100-foot fuel break zone. Tom Hollister worked the sign-up table. Emma served lemonade in paper cups. Paul stood by the door like a man guarding something precious. After the workshop, Emma walked home with me across the clubhouse parking lot. "Dad, are you going to get in trouble?" I put my arm around her shoulders. "No, honey, she is. 5 weeks is a long time when you're waiting. It's a longer time when your enemy can feel you waiting." Charlotte could feel me waiting. I don't know exactly what tipped her off. Maybe it was Paul's second records request. Maybe it was Diane's silence at the board meetings. Maybe it was the fact that Clayton Reeves had started CCing the Colorado Attorney General's office on every memo he sent her. Whatever it was, sometime around week 3, Charlotte Ashford stopped being strategic and started being personal, petty, nuclear. Personal. She started with Emma. Pinewood Ridge has a community pool with a small swim team. Nothing fancy. 15 kids, 1 volunteer coach. Pool closes in September. Emma has swum on it every summer since she was 9. 3 days after Diane gave me the USB drive, the swim coach called me laughing so hard I thought he was choking. A man named Wesley Harland. Retired USFS hotshot. Friend of 20 years. "Hunter, your HOA president just sent me a certified letter, demanding I remove your daughter from the swim team, and I'm quoting verbatim, behavioral concerns related to an unsafe home environment. What did you do?" I read it twice to make sure I hadn't gone deaf. Then I forwarded it to my attorney and to the county parks and rec director. Then I called you. "Hunter, Emma's the best backstroker we've had in 3 years. She is not going anywhere." I think that wasn't the end of it. On Thursday of week 4, a woman in a green cardigan knocked on my front door at 6:15 in the evening. She introduced herself as a caseworker from Larimer County Department of Human Services. She said she'd received an anonymous report alleging that Hunter Brooks, single father of a minor child, was a mentally unstable, fire-obsessive individual creating unsafe home conditions. She was professionally apologetic. She said she had to follow up on every tip. I invited the caseworker inside. I offered her coffee. She declined. I showed her the house. I showed her Emma's room, tidy, swim team ribbons on the wall, a framed photo of her mother on the nightstand. I showed her the kitchen, stocked, clean. I showed her my home office. The county permit for my fence was there, my USFS retirement paperwork, Caroline's obituary, my clean medical record from my annual physical 3 weeks earlier. I showed her Emma's report card, 2 A's and 3 A pluses. The caseworker took 40 minutes of notes. She thanked me for my cooperation. At the door, she paused. She looked at me and she said quietly, "Sir, whoever called this in is going to regret it. This is a textbook retaliatory false report, and I am going to say so in my final report." I added the DHS case file to the evidence package. Another misdemeanor. Filing a false report to a state social services agency. Colorado makes that one a Class 3 misdemeanor on its own. Emma didn't say anything that evening until we were sitting on the porch after dinner. It was getting cold. The sky was that dim, pre-snow blue that comes in late October. A coyote was calling down in the canyon, cedar smoke from someone's fire pit 3 lots down. She said, "Dad, what that lady did, that wasn't just mean. She tried to take me away." "I know. I want you to destroy her, Dad." I put my hand on her shoulder. I let the wind blow for a minute. "Emma, when you're in a fire, you don't chase the wind. You don't try to outrun it. You let it come to you, and you stand ready. That's what we're doing. We are standing ready. And the wind is going to turn the right way very soon." She leaned her head against my shoulder. We stayed on the porch until the Chinook picked up, and the cold drove us inside. That night at 9:47, my phone rang. It was Diane Stafford. Her voice was shaking. "Hunter, Charlotte just sent out the notice. She's calling an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday. She's going to try to amend the charter and strip Article 14.3 before the state audit finishes. Hunter, she knows." Friday morning at 8:14, Charlotte's mass email hit every inbox in Pinewood Ridge. Subject: Emergency HOA charter revision. Saturday 10 a.m. Mandatory attendance. The body of the email was 3 paragraphs of exhausted, corporate voice horror. The kind of tone that reads like someone trying to convince themselves they're still in charge. Charlotte was calling an emergency meeting to modernize the community's governing document by removing archaic provisions that no longer serve our evolving aesthetic standards. Translation: she was trying to strike Article 14.3 before the state audit concluded. She invoked an obscure provision that allowed the board to call an emergency meeting with 48 hours notice if community well-being was at risk. I read the email twice and laughed out loud. She cited an emergency provision to claim that a charter clause requiring fire mitigation was the emergency. Paul called me within 10 minutes. "Hunter, she's bussing in proxy votes. I already heard from 2 snowbird couples in Florida. She offered to pay for their flights if they signed proxy forms in her favor. How many has she locked in?" "Sources tell me 38. She needs about 50 votes to strip the clause. She's close." "How close is close?" "If the meeting were today, she might win it by 7 votes. I spent Friday at my dining room table, with the printer running non-stop. 43 evidence packets, each one 41 pages, spiral bound. Charter clause highlighted in yellow. Bulletin amendment flagged in red. Clayton Reeves' finding letter, Marion Lockwood's audit notice, the USGS fire behavior map, the Colorado Secretary of State LLC records for Canyon Rim Holdings and Canyon Rim Consulting, Diane's internal financial spreadsheets, and a page of photographs of my destroyed fence. 1 packet for every board member. 1 for every long-term resident I could identify. 1 for Clayton, Marion, Ellie, Sheriff Gordon Sinclair, and the president of the Larimer County Bar Association, and 1 extra, sealed in a manila envelope, addressed to Preston Ashford, which I planned to hand him personally. Paul drove over at 7 that evening with a 6-pack and a bag of sandwiches. He sat across from me at the table and coached me on parliamentary procedure for 2 hours. "Hunter, you do not interrupt her. You do not speak first. You let her read her motion. You let her call for a vote. When do I stand? You stand the moment the motion is on the table. Not before, not after. The moment. You say, 'Point of order, Madam President.' She'll try to ignore you. Say it again. She has to recognize you under Robert's rules. Then you ask for 5 minutes to speak before the vote. And then you read Article 14.3 out loud, word for word, slowly. And you hand every board member a copy of the charter. Just the charter. Not the evidence packet. Not yet. What about the rest? You hand out the rest only if she forces the vote, because that's when Marion Lockwood walks in, and Clayton Reeves walks in, and Ellie Davenport rolls tape. I nodded. Paul clinked my beer bottle with his. "Hunter, tomorrow is going to be the worst day of her life and the best day of yours. Try to enjoy it with some dignity." Ellie Davenport called me at 9. Hunter, Colin and I will be there at 9:30, parked at the edge of the lot so we're not visible. We'll roll once she starts her motion. The segment is fully edited except for the live footage. We go to air at 6 p.m. Denver time. Clayton Reeves called at 9:30. Hunter, I'll be there in uniform. The state inspector's office confirmed Marion is leaving Denver at 7 a.m. She'll bring 2 copies of her finding letter, one for Charlotte, one for the board. At 11 that night, my phone buzzed one more time. A text, no number, just a forwarded photo. Ring doorbell capture. A Pearl Lexus GX rolling slowly past my driveway. Charlotte at the wheel, looking directly at the empty footprint where my Firebreak fence used to stand. She pressed the horn once, then drove off. The timestamp read 10:57. I wasn't awake for the horn. Emma forwarded me the clip the next morning. I was awake at 5:30 Saturday morning. Before I made coffee, I opened the National Weather Service mountain forecast on my phone. Red flag warning for Larimer County. Effective 0600 to 1800 hours. Relative humidity, 8%. Chinook wind gusts to 45 miles per hour. Fire danger, extreme. Scrolling down, a new INCIWeb entry flashed at me. Deer Ridge Fire. Started 11 p.m. Friday. Cause under investigation. 14 miles west of Pinewood Ridge. 2% contained. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the map. Saturday was going to be the day. For all of us. Emma came downstairs at 6:15 in her swim team hoodie. She poured cereal. She looked at the forecast on my phone, then at me. She said, "Dad, you scared?" I shook my head. "No, honey, she should be." Saturday, 10:03 in the morning. The community clubhouse was packed. 89 residents, folding chairs 3 deep along the back wall. The smell of burned coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Outside, the Chinook was already gusting hard enough to rattle the plate glass windows. Through those windows, on the western horizon, an orange haze was starting to thicken over the ridgeline. The Deer Ridge Fire, 14 miles out, was no longer abstract. Charlotte sat at the front table in a crisp white linen blazer, sunglasses parked on top of her blonde blowout. Preston beside her in a navy sport coat. She looked calm. She looked rehearsed. She looked like a woman who had won every HOA fight she'd ever picked. She gavelled the meeting to order at 10:04. Tom Hollister sat to my left. Diane Stafford sat to my right. Paul Whitaker sat behind me, a copy of the 1991 charter open on his lap. Ellie Davenport stood at the back of the room with Colin and his camera. Clayton Reeves was not yet inside. Marion Lockwood was not yet inside. That was intentional. Charlotte read her motion. Resolved that Article 14.3 of the Pinewood Ridge Estates Declaration of Covenants be stricken in its entirety, as archaic and no longer relevant to modern aesthetic standards of this community. She called for a voice vote. I stood up. Point of order, Madam President. She did not look at me. She said, "There are no points of order during a voice vote, Mr. Brooks. Please sit down." Point of order, Madam President. Under Robert's Rules of Order, recognized as binding procedure by Article 22 of this association's governing bylaws. A murmur ran through the room. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Paul had predicted her every move. She recognized me. "You have 3 minutes, Mr. Brooks." "I'll take 5. Article 22 says 5. Paul coughed behind me. I held up the charter, opened to page 41, and I read Article 14.3 aloud. Slowly. The word "shall" in capitals. I finished the clause. Then I opened a second folder, and I read Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 24-33.5-1203, aloud, slowly. Tampering with state-permitted wildfire mitigation infrastructure. Civil penalty up to $75,000. Criminal referral at the discretion of the state fire marshal. I held up the county permit for my Firebreak fence. I held up the time-stamped photograph of Charlotte's crew cutting it apart. The room went quiet. Charlotte cleared her throat. "Mr. Brooks, your time is up." The door at the back of the clubhouse opened. Clayton Reeves walked in, full Larimer County Fire Marshal uniform. He walked up the center aisle, stopped at the front of the room, and turned to face the board. "Apologies for the interruption, Madam President. Larimer County Fire Marshal. I have an official finding to deliver." He read his finding aloud. 3 minutes of procedural language. Conclusion. Charlotte Ashford had caused the removal of a state-permitted wildfire mitigation structure in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes Section 24-33.5-1203, Referral to the Larimer County District Attorney, pending. Civil penalty, assessed. Charlotte's face went from calm to white to gray in the space of 30 seconds. The door opened again. Chief Deputy Marion Lockwood walked in. Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control jacket, hair pulled back tight. She walked up the aisle with 2 folders under her arm. She reached the front. She turned to the room. I will not take long. The state of Colorado has opened a formal audit of this homeowners association. Preliminary findings include the following: $340,000 in reserve fund transfers from the Pinewood Ridge Estates HOA to Canyon Rim Consulting LLC and Canyon Rim Holdings LLC. Both entities are registered to the same address as the HOA president. Both entities have been referred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for review under federal wire fraud statutes. Preston stood up. He headed for the back door. Sheriff Gordon Sinclair was standing in the doorway. Uniform, badge, and a very gentle smile. Mr. Ashford, we're going to need a word outside, please. Preston sat back down. Clayton Reeves's radio crackled. Dispatch voice, clipped and fast. All units. Deer Ridge fire spread accelerating. Wind shift at 280 degrees. Voluntary evacuation order issued for Canyon Vista Road residents. Priority mandatory evacuation. Lots 30 through 45. Repeat. Lot 37 highest risk. Defensible space compromised. Requesting immediate backup engine support. The room turned as one toward Charlotte. A volunteer firefighter named Eli stepped through the doorway. He said, "Ma'am, we need to evacuate your house right now. The wind corridor is wide open. The primary firebreak is gone." Charlotte did not move. I picked up my permit folder and stood up. I walked to the front of the room. I stopped directly in front of her. "Charlotte, I would offer to help you evacuate, but I'm too busy helping the fire crew figure out how to save the house you tried to expose." I walked out with Clayton. Behind me, Diane Stafford called the motion. Emergency vote of no confidence. Removal of Charlotte Ashford from all HOA board positions effective immediately. 84 in favor, 11 opposed. Here's what happened next. The Deer Ridge fire burned for 9 days. It consumed 2,700 acres of canyon and ridge country. It came within 400 yards of the Pinewood Ridge subdivision. Not a single home was lost. Clayton Reeves went on Channel 9 that following Tuesday and said Hunter Brooks's fire behavior model was the reason. His words: "The crews had used my USGS overlay to position their backup engines along the canyon rim. They held the flame front at the cleared juniper perimeter long enough for the wind to shift. Charlotte's house, Lot 37, had scorch marks up to the property line. Her roof shingles were curled and blackened on the west-facing pitch, but her house was still standing because of the fire crew, working off of my model, on maps built in part from the permitted firebreak footprint she had destroyed." Charlotte accepted a plea deal 3 weeks later. $52,000 in civil penalties, 18 months of probation, permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board in the state of Colorado. Her name was printed in the Larimer County Herald under a 3-column photograph of the burned Canyon Ridge. Preston was federally indicted on 6 counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and 3 counts of interstate real estate fraud. He's looking at 4 to 7 years in a federal facility in New Mexico. Canyon Rim Holdings and Canyon Rim Consulting were both dissolved. The 3 families Charlotte had pressured into selling, the Hendricksons, the Lombards, the Ridgeways, each received restitution settlements from the recovered reserve funds and from Preston's seized assets. The new HOA board made Diane Stafford interim president. Her first act was to restore Article 14.3 to its original wording. Her second was to create the Caroline Brooks Canyon Wildfire Defense Fund. $180,000 in seed capital recovered from the frozen HOA reserves. The fund pays for defensible space retrofits on every canyon rim lot. Hardened roofs, mesh-screened vents, firebreak fencing to state specifications. Free installation and inspection for every family on the rim. I was elected chair of the new HOA Fire Safety Committee. I accepted on one condition: that the committee be empowered to cross-check every future HOA fine against the charter and against state law. No resident would ever be fined again under a newsletter clause that did not exist in the governing document. The motion passed unanimously. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning in December, 120 residents gathered for the dedication of the rebuilt Firebreak fence. 400 feet of new galvanized mesh, cedar posts and fresh concrete, a small bronze plaque at the southern anchor post. The plaque reads, "In memory of Caroline Brooks, who loved this land and asked us to keep it safe." Emma stood in front of the gathering in her swim team hoodie and a pair of her mother's old silver earrings. She unfolded a piece of notebook paper. She read a letter she'd written to her mom. I cannot repeat what Emma said. That is hers. But I will tell you that Tom Hollister wiped his eyes on the back of his Marine Corps ball cap, and Paul Whitaker squeezed my shoulder twice and walked off to the coffee table so no one would see his face. I walked the fence line alone a few days later at sunset. The Chinook was up. The air smelled like pine sap and cooled earth. I touched the plaque. I told Caroline what had happened. I told her Emma was all right. I told her the land would be, too. I think she already knew. Here's the lesson. The fire you fear most is almost never the fire itself. It's usually a person, someone small, someone petty, someone who mistook their clipboard for a weapon. You can spend 9 years building a kingdom out of fines and fear and fake authority. But the first time the wind turns, the only thing standing between your house and the flame front is the work someone else did. Quietly, legally, with their own hands, while you were busy tearing it down. If you've ever had an HOA president weaponize a rulebook against you, drop your story in the comments. And stay subscribed. Next week, I'm telling you about the HOA president who tried to condemn a retired pastor's chicken coop. She ended up losing her real estate license, her husband, and a federal tax audit all in the same week.
Every time I sit down to tell one of these stories, I think about what it takes to defeat a person like Charlotte Ashford, and the answer is never what you expect. It's not raising your voice, it's not fighting harder, it's documentation, patience, permits, filings, and a simple willingness to let the villain keep talking while your phone says to record. Hunter Brooks didn't win this one with anger. He won it because he knew something Charlotte didn't. And a shutter is not a bulletin. A permit is not a suggestion. And Colorado state law has teeth when a real fire marshal decides to use them. Today, the Caroline Brooks Canyon Wildfire Defense Fund is still up and running in Pinewood Ridge Estates. Every home on that canyon rim has proper firebreak fencing again. And Charlotte and President Ashford will never serve on an HOA board in this state for the rest of their lives. If you had an HOA weaponize a rulebook against you, share your story below. Hit subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode, where a retired pastor's chicken coop becomes the most expensive mistake an HOA president has ever made. See you then!